So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce my next guest, Mark Dyson, all the way from Chicago. Mark is a career advice writer and consultant, and he loves helping people with their ideal career. He has a very established award-winning blog, The Voice of Job Seekers, and in 2021 was recognised as JobScan's top search expert to follow for LinkedIn. So he's got an absolute wealth of knowledge that he's going to be sharing with us today. So Mark, can you, introduce yourself, tell us a bit more about yourself and what you're going to be talking about today?
All things job search and careers is what I usually talk about, and I can answer any questions that you may have, or maybe your audience has contributed questions. But yes, I've been in the field, I think 13 years now. So, and I've been online for most of that time. So I did get started in the early social media days. In fact, I had my first Twitter account back in 2008. And I didn't use it for a year because I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do with it. But then I went on and started to post some content eventually, and found my way around there, and was able to not only help people, but I was able to learn a bunch myself. So I met a lot of folks there, and that eventually I got to the point to where I had one service that I provided, which was a resume service. But one day I posted an article, I forgot exactly where, but somebody sent me a tweet that said, "Thank you for being the voice of job seekers." And I said, maybe there's something a little bit different. And I found out that was the perfect voice for me. So I phased out the resume and the coaching and all that, and took my experience to be a writer and to kind of throw my voice into the conversations that matter for job seekers. So that's why I'm called the voice of job seekers. And I wish I would have kept that tweet. That's the only regret that I have. But from that point on, which was 2011, to the blog, the podcast, video channels, and a bunch of other places where I actually am giving as much as I can to help job seekers make a difference in their lives and their job search.
So, currently, what are your observations about what's going on for job seekers right now?
One of the things that I talk about a lot is there are different layers to the Great Resignation, and I know people are going to be tired of that. And I can understand why, because we're always talking about the Great Resignation, but it is a significant movement at this particular time, and perhaps in the history of the workplace. Everything that we knew that was traditional and that we thought was going to be true and thought that was going to be always the case is being tested. And I wouldn't say that there's a litmus test, but the fibers of it are being tested. And I'm talking about the way that maybe an police investigator would test fibers for blood and for hair or anything else, because it is a very meticulous process. And I think for the most part, every part is being tested, to the way that we work, to how we communicate and how we feel about work. And if we don't like it, people have said now that I'm not going to stay in a place where it doesn't serve me, or where there's a fair exchange between work and pay, or flexible or flexibility in schedule or benefits. And there's so many other facets of it. There's the gender issue, there's race issues, there are human issues that are involved as well. So that's what's being tested right now, and we're going through a lot of the different phases that really matter to people, and they're beginning to speak up. In large part, it is the younger generation, like the Gen Z and the millennial I think they originally called Gen Y, I believe, but nobody uses that term anymore. But all that to be said is that the younger people are testing every fiber of it, and that includes how they want to work and where they want to work and whether it's equitable or not. And they want to have a living uh, wage and wealth a whole lot quicker than the rest of the generations have had in the past, because we grew up, and I'll say that I'm a baby boomer. I'm not worried about discrimination of any kind, but I am a baby boomer, one of the older, probably younger of the older generations that are still involved and engaged in this topic and conversation. Uh, we had things passed on to us. So in the fact that they've been passed on to us, we just held them to be true. And although we see reasons why not to continue, we didn't dare to step out of those lines because we benefit from having what was called stability and that we're going to be vested, that we'll have a pension and that we'll be able to retire at 65, only to find out that a lot of those were lies for a lot of people too, because
True.
employers didn't really take care of us when they promised, and didn't really give us advancement and fair pay and all those things. And you can allot that to whatever group you want to allot that to. But all in all, we were sort of the back goods that existed maybe in the 1960s and maybe the 70s. But as time went on, those truths became shadows of truths and eventually false. So, for a lot of us who are still in the workplace, I'm still debating whether I'm still in the workplace or not. But I think for a lot of people just in my age are still trying to pursue a job, still need a job. But the rules have changed because Gen Z says, first of all, this staying 5 years till I'm invested into a pension, that's not going to work for me. And second of all, I don't have to wait really 2 weeks to quit. I can quit now and get a job in 2 or 3 weeks. That rule doesn't necessarily apply to baby boomers in that speed, but I think the spirit of it is, why tolerate something that is not benefiting you or that is not fair to you? So I think those things are going on in part, and we could talk about the different layers that are happening and are beginning to morph. But to a great degree, I think the original one of the thoughts I've been having lately is that maybe the Great Resignation really isn't about being great or resignation anymore. I'm thinking that maybe we have to kind of reframe what is it that's really happening, because a lot of it, and to explain, a lot of people don't necessarily resign, and maybe resign the same day they announce and leave because they're tired of the job, or they're being mistreated, or not being able to get the schedule. Maybe it's because instead of getting that minimal performance review raise, I can go across the street to the competitor, as long as I don't have a non-compete contract, and make 10%. They'll be glad to have me. And because I had the experience, they give me 10% without negotiating per se. So I can make more. So that way, somebody who's staying in the company would take 4.5 years to get the 10% I'm getting now. And then if that time runs out, then I can do that somewhere else. And one of the other benefits is the fact that they can advance their careers depending upon how they position themselves, and continually to also get better benefits and also learn new things that also will add to their career tool sets that they'll need for now and later on. So all that to say,
yeah.
all that to say is that window, or we need to either calibrate if it's great or if we see the resignation, but I don't think we call it that great anymore, because our reasoning for it is not just so we can all quit and join a fraternity or sorority or a club. It's so that, that there was actually thought by the people, all these people who originally quit. They thought about it. Everybody else kind of joined the spirit, said, hey, that's why I felt that way for a long time. And people made some really bad decisions during that time. Some of the stories I've heard over time is just incredulous, but all that to say, the spirit is to find something that's right for your life and to really own and take hold of your career choices.
Yeah, I think that's for me, that's I talk about mindful job searching. In that you really work out, you look at the whole part of life. It's not just about the job, it's not just about home, it's not just about pay, is it? It's about the full circle of what's right for you as an individual, your family, your lifestyle, your aspirations. And I think that is in the job hopping, the job resignation, jumping market, that can fall apart sometimes. And as recruiters, I'm always really interested, when you have that classic question, why did you make a move? And it's so often just guided by money. It's the one thing. And I like to always encourage people to think about the big circle.
Well, in the early days, when they were talking about people going back to work last summer, there were management and even a few executives, not just the rank and file worker, were giving the answers of why you change your jobs. Because my job is going hybrid. I want to work 100% from remote work. Now, I never, probably like you, I would never advise anybody, any job seeker, to tip their whole hand. As playing cards, you don't want to show everything you got. You want to kind of, be strategic about it. And people were dead honest about it. But, word got out there that people were giving these answers. And it wasn't a complete rejection, which I think was very interesting, because people got hired for even after giving those answers. So it wasn't a wrong answer. It was quite a transparent one. But it's not always the best, because then you're saying, well, then you really need a job. So therefore, I kind of, I can play the hand of giving you a lower salary because I know this is something they're offering, and people took it. People took a 25% cut because now they don't have to travel 2 hours to work and 2 hours back. They can work from home and have all the accessories they need to be functional at home and at work at the same time. So it wasn't a total bad decision, but it is one of those things where, you got to be careful what you put out there to an employer, because they're looking for an advantage as well as you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned earlier on that you sort of started your career in the resume world. And I know that recently you talked to is it Amanda Augustine about resumes and good tips for 2022. So obviously, 2022, so much has happened already in 2022, hasn't it? So right now, if you're talking to a job seeker, what do you think is really important about those top tips for 2022?
As far as the resume is concerned?
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that there's several different layers to this. One is in the United States, as us as career professionals, we tend to give a generality, and sometimes that's not good enough to serve a lot of different audiences, because there are people in the federal government who have different, in the United States and probably parts of the world, they don't use the resume, the brief document as more of as a marketing tool. They use a CV style sometimes even to show the whole history because that's what the government wants. So, you know, whereas if people apply to the private sector, it might be 1 or 2 pages, or maybe even 3 if it's going to communicate the value. In the federal sector, somebody who's been working in the working world for 10 years needs to have more than that. And I've seen resumes in the federal sector, for the federal sector, up to 25 pages. And they're very detailed, and they're very, and they want to know everything from high school to that particular point. So that's a little bit different sector. We didn't talk, Amanda and I didn't talk particularly about that because we talked about the general, but I think it's fair to mention is that there's different thoughts and different ways that each career needs to position themselves to market themselves. But basically for the rest of the world, especially the United States, the resume is a marketing document, and you're showing your career highlights, and it needs to be crisp, it needs to be concise, but it needs to be full of value, and it needs to display data points that the employer that you're applying to can say, I need this or I don't need this. But the way I think a resume ultimately it's great when you're, you know, to give people the shot. I think the sweet spot is more what people do away from the resume than what they put on the resume. And that is, you know, if you're an executive, you know, it's, you know, not particularly productive, or you're not going to be as effective if you don't show how to give thought leadership and opportunity to speak a lot for your accomplishments and all the things that you've done. You can list them all on your resume and it can be pretty tight, but somebody who is looking for somebody in the C-suite, or vice president, or a senior manager level type of position, to see somebody give responses to like what's going on in Ukraine right now in real time, there's tons of value there, because they're saying, this is how I look at it, and this is how I would lead, and this is the perspective. And somebody looking on, they're not going to be paying attention too much to a resume as much as that what that person says. So they follow you for a few days and see that you're a very thoughtful leader. That has a whole lot more real time value than a resume does. And those are opportunities that people tend to waste because they say, well, I don't have the time or the effort. Well, part of the game is giving the value to the world, and you know, you get it back eventually because you know you've added value that people can't get through a book or a magazine. You're giving it in real time, which is, you know, is an amazing thing to see, and have seen that happen time after time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, you're a LinkedIn expert and got incredible experience on there. I've been talking to some of my candidates about looking at their SSI on LinkedIn and seeing how well they're actually socially interacting with LinkedIn. Do you see that as part of the success model for candidates, to have that engagement with everything, you know, a lot of things that are relevant, not everything, but things that are relevant for them on LinkedIn? Do you think that helps in the employment game?
I think it helps in the employment game. I'm not willing to go and say you absolutely have to, because people building careers right now without LinkedIn. But I think if you have a problem with building a career, LinkedIn gives you an automatic access to be seen if you're willing to have 100% profile filled out with a photo, and you're actually being, if you're engaging and you're offering people value, which is where the sweet spot is, not the fact that you just have a profile and you have all the qualifications, but people want to see that applied knowledge, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think people are automatically drawn to say, hey, this person has some thoughts and I've never seen that before, or these really resonate with me. And that's what builds that engagement, and that was ultimately gets people, will get the attention of employers somewhere along the line. It's going to be different for everybody, but I'm not willing to broad stroke and say you should have a LinkedIn profile because it gives you the visibility that you otherwise wouldn't get. And if things aren't working, that's the first place I would stop.
Yeah. Yeah, I look at it like your personal website. It's like your personal business website, because you can showcase and give people snapshots about yourself. And I think that's really valuable. But also there's so much to learn on there, isn't there, as well? I mean, there's so much value that you can get from the whole LinkedIn community. So
LinkedIn, a lot of people think they're really, they're not understanding how LinkedIn is starting to really create this robust media machine that they are. They've hired reporters and new editors, and now they're expanding their content creation to podcasts. And eventually, I think that they may even be the first stop for anyone, whether it's a job seeker or you're an entrepreneur or you're even a scientist. That's going to be the hub to go to for all things media. It's becoming more of a media company than it is more a social networking company. And of course, that's great because it will show as you build the profile out. Even it will rank higher if you had a website. If you had your own website, your LinkedIn profile is going to rank even higher because of the way that everybody's contributing to this ecosystem of knowledge and advice, especially for job seekers.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you sort of with that fount of knowledge you got in there, what are the three things that you want employers to know for them to reach job seekers successfully?
Employers need to be transparent and understand that they have many of them have a history of a lack of transparency because they can be Googled and they can be seen. And don't forget, a lot of companies lied to people, told them they couldn't go remote. They told them that there's no way we can support remote work. But when the whole world went on shutdown and people couldn't get into office building, all of a sudden they came up with remote work within a few months. Some companies a few weeks. So your reputation is on the line, that matters. Secondly, employers can no longer hide. People are being very honest about their experiences with their boss. Whoever you have managing and supervising represents you. So you can't say, well, we have a bad boss unless you fire them. They could be put out on social media and it could be broadcast across the world. I don't know how many managers that have had to step down or step away or be terminated because of bad behavior. So you no longer can separate that, and no longer will people be quiet about it because they're also taking into account that if I look for a company and I really like them at first, but I found that the manager of the department that I would be in is a bad manager and a bad boss with bad behavior, then I'm not going to work for that company, of course. So all those things will really matter. And probably the third thing, companies will need to realize that I don't want to use things don't happen in a vacuum, but people will see if history have taught you something. So in other words, if there's emergencies or pandemics or whatever, how you handled them before is going to matter how you handle them in the future to what matters to that person. So, if you've had people who had you had a company who had lots of COVID cases and a company doesn't recognize or at least adjust to make sure that nobody else gets a contagious disease in the future? Or if there were emergencies, how would you handle it? A job seeker is going to look at that and say they don't know how to respond in emergency or stressful situations, just as judiciously as companies have judged candidates and saying the same thing. So I would say those three would be really big on the radar, amongst a whole bunch of other things, but we won't go there right now.
You know, thinking about what you just talked about and all of that,
Mhm.
what's the one single action that you would like to leave listeners with that they should go off and think about, bearing in mind that these are, and to use your terminology, they're either underemployed, unemployed, or underappreciated people who are looking at their careers right now and thinking, like, what do I do next? With all your wealth of knowledge, what's the one single action that you would advise people to take?
Okay, well, being that wealth of knowledge is quite subjective. Uh, we can,
Oh,
we can,
listen,
we
Mark, I've
can,
been following you for a long time.
we can argue that, but it never boils down to one action. But I would say that a lot of people would do their best job search and create more opportunities if they really did the deeper work in understanding what their value, what value they offer employers. And it, and I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. Think about what you would want to offer an employer. And because it really comes down to what you do, not what you mistakenly do, or although that does really help, find those 2 or 3 things and be sure that you're mentioning it, you're sharing about it and showing that you are more than competent in those areas. Anybody can be average, but not everybody can be extraordinary. And you want to show when you're extraordinary. So take those areas and dig deep into those. Just 2 or 3, and you can find layers and layers of possibilities there.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that you leaving us with a lovely free gift. Do you want to sort of explain what that's all about?
Yeah, it's a PDF, 421 modern job search tips for
Incredible.
2021. It was collected over several years, and I just kept adding addendums to it. So there are a lot of things that are still very relevant to the job search and will help people succeed and at least point in the right direction. And I don't expect people to read all of it. I mean, who's going to go through and apply 421 tips, right? Because all of them may not apply to you, but you'll find certain ones that will. And if you ever have any questions, feel free to contact me. But yeah, they're just tips, and I try to tell stories that will help some of those tips and strategies come alive.
And what's the best place and the best way for people to contact you?
LinkedIn is great for contact, but also my website, thevoiceofjobseekers.com. You can sign up for the newsletter, which I update every 2 weeks.
Fantastic. And obviously as well, people can see you live a couple of times a week. So
yes. On LinkedIn and Twitter.
Yeah. So Wednesdays at 1 p.m.
Yes.
Is it?
And Fridays
and Fridays at 1 p.m.
Eastern.
Yeah. So, and I can totally recommend those sessions. That's how I found Mark myself, and I love listening in. Sometimes I catch up, but you have some great topics and very thought provoking.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.